Instead of us going to the market and saying, okay, here's the value we create, here's what we charge for it, we say, here's the value we create, here's what we would have charged, but here's the revenue instead we'll generate after we take our small cut for the service. So we're going into publishers and saying, we have a unique model that will pay you if you use our technology.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley, in partnership with Leumi Tech, sponsored by Hippo Insurance, Upwest Labs, Turing, Hillel at Stanford, Leap, and in media partnership with CTech. In this next episode, we're going to be talking about media and startups, but we're also going to be talking about this entrepreneur that went from large companies, now leading a startup, and what that means for him. Meet Jeff Kupietzky, CEO of Jeeng, an innovative technology company helping publishers bring their audience back. Before joining Jeeng, Jeff was president and CEO at Oversee.net and served in leadership positions with X1 Technologies, Digital Insight of Intuit, Siebel Systems, Oracle, Loudcloud, Opsware, Hewlett-Packard, and McKinsey Co. A frequent speaker at digital media conferences, he has also been featured on CNN and CNBC. Jeff earned an MBA from Harvard Business School and his Bachelor's of Arts in Economics from Columbia University. Meet Jeff. Jeff Kupietzky, how are you? Good morning.
I'm doing well. Good morning to you as well.
I'm really excited to have you here, Jeff, talking about Jeeng. Now, I think that your journey is a little unorthodox in the sense of you starting this company now after Columbia, Harvard MBA, McKinsey, and then a lot of companies where you were vice president. And my memory is too bad to even begin listing them all. But after all of that, you're now working in the publishing space, AI space, and search, and thinking through in 2021 how we get the right content for the right people. And you know, things are changing quickly, and I'm excited to learn from you both about your journey and that. So I'm gonna ask with the easiest question of them all, Jeff, who are you? Who is Jeff?
Well, I'll share a story because I spent the early part of my career in Silicon Valley. I had the opportunity to work with Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz at a company called Opsware, which ended up being sold to HP. And, you know, that's a very famous kind of story. There was a book written by Ben called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And I was with them during that period. And one of the things I loved the story was they hired MBAs, but not because they thought they knew anything. Because it's like if you wanted to build a hockey team, you wouldn't give them a video of how to play hockey. You'd say, you know, strap on some pads and go learn the game on the ice. So I think that was, for me, a good way to learn how to be an entrepreneur, how to think about starting big businesses. And of course, you learn a lot of other things along the way. But my journey took me from California, ultimately from Northern California to Southern California, which is where I'm originally from. And then I looked east, where I thought there was a lot more opportunity and a lot more interesting things going on, and ended up in the Tel Aviv area just about 10 years ago. Now, Jeeng itself is not my startup, although I treat it that way. I actually was brought in when it was a different focus. The chairman and founder of the company is a brilliant man, in Aryeh Bergi, who started M Systems, which those listeners might be familiar with as Disk on Key, and he's the unsung partner of Dov Moran. And Aryeh had a vision for how email was underdeveloped, underutilized, but the application was around banking and how to make banking more interesting, more secure using email as a web, basically conduit. And we took that technology and we really believed in it, but we had to pivot a few times to get it to where I think ultimately the best use case is, which is in the publishing industry.
So walk me, that's exactly what I want to talk about. I want to understand, how do you come into a company and like I mentioned before we started recording, the amazing thing is that here, you've done so much before. You've had the privilege really of choosing your next challenge and the things you're excited about. And what I'm hearing you is that there was this interesting journey that you did within Jeeng to find the right product market fit for an amazing technology that was built. And I'm especially curious to hear, how does one strategically go about finding that? You're starting with an amazing technology and finding the right use case. How does that work?
Well, the truth is you have to have an idea of the market, right? So it's product market fit. Many times people focus too much on the product, not too much on the market. But you really have to be thinking about what the market wants. And I think in some ways we made, like others, many mistakes where we made certain assumptions and they didn't come true. But ultimately, there were learnings along the way that kind of, if you will, reiterated some of our core beliefs about how we could improve the way that content was being connected with consumers, and that we had something to improve in that process. And really, just to give a quick intro of what Jeeng does today, we personalize content on behalf of publishers so that they can have a one-to-one connection with their users and the content that they distribute. In the traditional publishing model, they create a lot of great content and then wait for Google and Facebook and basically the algorithms to find it. They bring those users in, but at that point, there's no real control or understanding of that audience by the publisher. And I might even say, with no offense to your father, that many times Google and Facebook have taken out the value of that audience prior to giving it back to the publisher. So our view is that publishers can be empowered because they have great content to own their audience and bring them back. And the way they do that is by creating a way to understand what does that user want when they're looking for news or they're looking for information or they're looking for hobby, tips and things that they're interested in. What is that user going to respond to? And then how best can you as a publisher position yourself to give them that solution? So what Jeeng has created is a very simple tool that allows us to put JavaScript on a web page, categorize the content, and then help the publishers by sending personalized messages. That could be push, that could be email, in the future that could be SMS or over WhatsApp, etc. And the idea is to actually connect the user with what they're really interested in and only that content. So if you will, today you might be getting lots and lots of email that are not interesting. We're going to make it so that publishers send you only something that you're interested in. And that's really the power of Jeeng.
So what I'm hearing here is this umbrella of personalization, right? And this idea that we've had publishers for, I guess, thousands of years, right? Ever since we started writing and communicating in some language. But now it's the idea of the single message that you're creating is not necessarily the right one for a lot of your audience, and every audience typecast has a different need from that. How do you go even about trying to understand, even logically, how to classify different people based on their need? How do you even try to understand what is their need?
Well, the good news is that because we're very much based on email, there's a built-in identifier, which is your email address. And if you think about it as a consumer, you're going to open up your email on your iPhone, on your Samsung device, on a tablet, at your work computer. So you've got multiple places that you're accessing content that historically, if they only use cookies, which are going away, as you know, then you're not going to be seen as a single individual. But really, a user wants to be seen as logged in. When you access Facebook or Twitter or Google, you're always logged in. A publisher doesn't get that benefit because the users are coming, if you will, on discrete channels. What we do is we use the email address. It's hashed, so it's not identified to a specific individual, but it's unique. And then we can find what that user is interested in by looking at their behavior across the channels. So in the morning, you might be looking up sports scores. In the middle of the day, it might be your stocks. And later in the day, you're kind of looking up ski slopes and information about where the best powder is going to be this weekend. And putting all that all together under the same, if you will, identifier allows us to build a profile of that user and provide that to the publisher so they can target the right content, not just over the right channel, but also at the right time to make it most more engaging for the consumer.
Now, this brings me to my favorite conversation, which is around privacy. And, I know where I'm on the spectrum, and I'm on an extreme end of the spectrum, probably very much on your end. But tell me a little bit about the conversation of privacy that arises here that, a lot of the older generation or the people that aren't born with a smartphone in their hand, immediately the hairs on the back of their neck rise up as soon as you start saying something like, we see what the user is doing, and based on that, we do something.
Well, we absolutely believe that the user has to control the relationship of their data. And that's why, again, when the industry had been historically based on cookies, there's no permission-based typically in the United States. Obviously, Europe has something else. But with using email address, that's a, if you will, identifier that the user has complete control over. They determine when somebody uses that information, they can always unsubscribe, they can always say, don't use my data. And that gives control to the user. But you'd be interested to know that we've done some surveys where people tell us they're very comfortable sharing information if it means they get more personalized content. We talk about keeping the press free, and what we mean by that is not meaning just independent. We mean it as not to be charged for. Most consumers don't want to pay for content, and they recognize they've got to see some advertising in order to read those articles that they love, see the videos that they love, without having to pay for that content. And we think that the future world is not going to be based on paid subscription, but based on advertising supported, curated content. And that's where we can help support publishers and maintain a free or independent press.
Exactly. And I have to say, anecdote about myself. I remember the times when everybody was talking about how Facebook is listening to our microphones and to determine the newsfeed. And I remember, well, everybody were, appalled by this. I was actually excited by the notion that I want to give all the information possible so that I can get the best experience on social media. But, maybe that is a little bit of
as long as you can control it, that's our view. And I think consumers who know that and can stay in control will feel better about that trade-off.
Now, walk me through the higher picture here. So great. You're connecting publishers with the right consumers, with the right content. Win-win situation. What does this do to the world of content? What does this do to the world of advertising as we know it? And I'm excited to ask you this in 2021, and I'll watch this back in a few years, and it's a changing consumer idea, right?
So first of all, for consumers, this is extremely important, right? Because if we don't have multiple sources of invested content, meaning where people are writing it and there's curation, we're going to be left with, no offense, but whatever we find on social media. And that's the worst place to get our news and information. It doesn't provide, I think, diversity of thought and opinion. It doesn't necessarily lead us. So we won't go all the way there, but I think where I'm getting at is we as a society need an independent press, and that's very important. We need a business model for publishers that can scale, that's sufficient. And we've had that for many years. It's advertising. Let's kind of look at where the world is going. We're moving from kind of untargeted brand-based, typically analog advertising, right? So TV, radio, outdoor, and moving more towards targeted performance digital advertising, which is obviously where digital media comes in. But publishers have not gotten their fair share of that pie. Sure, Facebook, Google, Amazon, they continue to get a bigger share of that pie as it grows. Our view is that the world will eventually come back to where those who create great content, aggregate audience, will get a better share of that advertising pie. And companies like ours, I believe, will help those publishers because they don't have the resources to build the AI, to understand what they need in terms of user preference, to even the playing field a bit so that they can have a logged-in user experience similar to what Google, Facebook, and Amazon can create.
Right, and I think that, a different trend that is separate but similar that I'm personally excited about is this whole idea of the creator economy. And, I think if previously we'd consider publishers to be, these big brands that are creating content, well, today, it's crazy to me that I'm a publisher, I guess.
You are.
Through what I'm doing. And it's weird because at the end of the day, it's becoming more and more apparent that every person can be a publisher, whether they like it or not. By gratitude of us being online. Talk to me a little bit about the business of this. So the business of publishers and consumers, this whole space that you're in, how does the economics actually work? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, so we're a typical software company in that there's a price for our service. What makes us, though, very unique is that when we tell our publishers, you can pay us to use the platform, or we have a better idea, because you're in the business of aggregating audience and then serving them advertising, how about we serve the advertising on your behalf? Every send that you do, we'll put in advertising that you can decide, we solicit it, then we can do it as a revenue share. So instead of us going to the market and saying, okay, here's the value we create, here's what we charge for it, we say, here's the value we create, here's what we would have charged, but here's the revenue instead we'll generate after we take our small cut for the service. So we're going into publishers and saying, we have a unique model that will pay you if you use our technology. And so that's really allowed us to scale it much faster than we would have in a traditional SaaS model.
So you enter a room and you tell a publisher that you're going to pay him if he uses your software, or she, of course. And what is the reaction? I mean, it's because it's a little bit mind-boggling, right?
Well, we joke. There was no reason we had called the company Jeeng, but every time I say that phrase, I hear ka-jing. That's more money in my pocket. So let's leave it at that.
I love it. Now, Jeff, you've done a lot, and you've gone through a lot of different milestones. Executive at a variety of companies, worked with Ben and Mark. That's amazing. Harvard.
I've worked with 4 billionaires, I think, over my career. So Tom Siebel, if
Not
you're
just
familiar with.
billionaires, the pioneers of the tech ecosystem and the internet. Really, we're much more, I think, than billion. It's really, when I hear those names, I get excited just by virtue of what they've done to society. And you chose Jeeng as your next, baby and your next passion project. Walk me a little bit through the thought process of a tech veteran executive that has the pleasure of choosing whatever opportunity he wants. Why Jeeng?
Yeah, well, my prior role was I was CEO of a larger media company based in Los Angeles called Oversea.net. We were one of the largest kind of, if you will, players in the internet real estate, so domain names and things like that. And after I decided to transition there, to be honest, I was going over to Israel and I thought, you know what? There's two types of companies. I can go to a bigger company and apply my trade, or I could really start much earlier and learn a lot more for myself. And I think looking back, it was the more risky kind of move, and it probably took a bit longer than I expected, but it's been much more fulfilling to be there in the early stages, to make those mistakes, to have to recover from them, and then build something from that. And so I've been very pleased with the opportunity that I had. And to be honest, it's really because of Aryeh and the board and others that have, I think, had faith in what we're doing that we've been able to kind of stay at it as long as we have.
How does the leadership that you have to exert differ from being the CEO of a large company before? Now you're running a smaller company, startup. How does that change?
I think you get involved in much more of the nitty gritty, if you will. You end up getting more involved in marketing and product and obviously early HR decisions, recruiting, things like that. But I think I was less, as engaged. Again, if you're a kind of person that likes building and likes getting involved, it's great. But that's generally one of the changes. I like to think of it as I was more challenged when the company was smaller. As we're now getting bigger, I'm getting more comfortable again to things I recognize. So I feel like I'm playing more to my strengths as we get bigger. So I used to joke on management 2.0. I come with a 3.0 mindset to a 1.0 situation, and eventually it balances out.
I love that. Now, a little bit about challenges. I'd really love to hear, sometime throughout this really glamorous career that said, wow, like I'm stumped, I'm surprised, this is something that's not trivial. And those are I think the learning moments that I get excited by. Did you have any of those?
All the time. I definitely encourage your listeners to always ask, call a friend. As CEOs, that's the last thing we like to think about is that we don't know the answer, and we have to actually show some, vulnerability and say, I don't know the answer, let me go ask. So I'm part of a CEO group where we ask each other all the time for help, and can you help me out? And this is what I'm struggling with. And I tell everybody that in the end of the day, it's really the collaboration of great minds that will get the right answer. So you have to ask those questions.
Right, and I think that one of the things that I was actually talking to a big investor here in Israel in venture capital, and he was saying how one of the struggles that he sees is that as a VC you have to also foster a space, a safe and trusting space where the CEO and the founder can actually exert that vulnerability, which today, according to LinkedIn and Crunchbase and TechCrunch, you're really not supposed to do because it's supposed to be all bravo.
That's right. So
right.
I'd say you can ask. It doesn't have to be over LinkedIn or Facebook, but the human contact still works. Picking up a phone, talking in person, that's still unparalleled.
Exactly. Jeff, I really want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here. I really appreciate it. I have a few questions, not about Jeeng, not about your career, but about you, if you're ready for them.
Go ahead.
We're going back to middle school and high school. What was your favorite subject?
I think history. I think the more I kind of learned and looked back about the subject I got most excited about, I always believe everything you need to do in the future, something happened in the past that you can learn from. So the more you understand that past, the more at least you'll make only new mistakes.
Amazing. And somebody throughout your career or now that serves as some sort of inspiration, some sort of role model.
Yeah, this is going to sound a little bit corny and non-high-techy, but for those who are familiar with the personal life of Maimonides, I always found that to be very inspiring. He obviously was considered in our tradition to be a great thinker, leader, mystic, prolific writer, but he actually had a great day job. He was the physician to the Sultan, and he actually was pretty busy in his field. And that idea that he was able to blend this kind of personal and professional together to achieve what he did, I think is very inspirational.
Amazing. And what are 3 words that you would choose for yourself?
Might not be what other people know about me, but I'll start with, I hope, integrity. You get what you hear, and there shouldn't be any difference. Humor. When you don't get what you hear, I'm probably kidding about it. And most important probably is perseverance. And at the end of the day, those who kind of succeed are the ones who just stick with it.
Jeff, thank you very, very much. This was wonderful, and I learned a lot, both on a personal level, but also on a professional level, and it just makes me want to go dig deeper into what you're doing and where this economy is moving and where this consumer behavior is shifting. Best of luck with Jeeng, and stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you very much, Michael. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Take care.